Now, with that meeting that was held in Geneva, of course, that was on short notice. And then we've been frantically hearing about this phone call between President Trump and President Xi. They're touting this, and some would even kind of assume, given how things were easily resolved at the temporary trade truce at the meeting in Geneva, could we see some good resolutions in this phone call that has yet to take place?
I'm not optimistic. I think it's no better than 50-50 that the phone call takes place. I think it was CNBC's Eunice Yoon I caught during New York hours today reporting from Beijing saying that Chinese were sort of cool to the idea of a call. I don't think they will agree to a call unless the outcome is predetermined and they're getting something pretty substantial. So the Geneva meeting was spun as China sort of getting more than the U.S. or getting more than it gave, which was true over that weekend. But if you look at over the course of the year, the U.S. has instituted new, 30% baseline tariffs, higher in some cases, on China. And if China were to remove all its measures in response, the U.S. would have sort of gotten that tariff raise for free. So I think the idea that China's just going to agree to release these rare earths, say, we made a misunderstanding at Geneva, here you go. That's not going to happen. The U.S. knows this, and I believe the strategy with a series of events, a series of actions on the U.S. side to tighten export controls of, semiconductor testing equipment, aircraft parts, and the like that China is dependent on the U.S. for. I think the U.S. is trying to create bargaining chips that they can trade for rare earths. So some of the more recent export control measures from the U.S. side could be unwound in response for China, releasing these rare earth minerals. I think that's the play the U.S. is trying to make. I'm not sure China is going to go for it. China spent decades, perhaps, sort of developing this, what seems to be a very effective trade weapon with these rare earth minerals. It's now been taken out of the hangar. I think it's sort of a use it or lose it now, because the rest of the world now knows that this is something that China will use when the time comes, and is going to rush to try to rectify that situation. So China's got a finite window of effectiveness of this weapon, and I don't think they're going to reholster it lightly. So I'm not sure China will release the rare earths without getting a rollback in tariffs, and I'm not sure the U.S. can do that without really derailing the entire Trump trade policy. So it's a tricky spot.
Yeah, so the China tariffs is a 10%, which all countries have, plus the 20% on the fentanyl. And we haven't heard any developments in that regard. Are you hearing anything?
No, nothing. And it was only a couple of days after the Geneva consensus was reached. The foreign ministry spokesman from China reverted to China's line that fentanyl is a U.S. problem. We've done everything we can. The U.S. needs to, sort that out. People in the U.S. shouldn't be taking these drugs, basically. So there's nothing on that. And I think that's just going to be a very, very difficult problem to resolve, because there's really no way out of that problem without China acknowledging that it wasn't doing everything it could to prevent the poisoning of thousands of Americans. So I'm not sure how they now say, okay, you're right, we weren't doing everything we could, now we will. And I think the Trump administration probably knew that was going to be a very difficult box for China to get out of, just in terms of the diplomatic message it sends to acknowledge that they've been doing something other than everything they could to stop the flow of those drugs.
Now, when we talk about this trade war and the discriminatory measures, the Trump administration has also revoked or planning to revoke visas for Chinese students. So this includes students from Hong Kong. How does this get lumped into a trade war?
That's a fascinating question. There was that issue, and there was also the sort of non-binding guidance they gave that any user of certain Huawei chips might be deemed in contravention of U.S. export controls because the chips were probably made with equipment that was export controlled. It didn't really accomplish anything. And similar to the student visa issue, it's sort of just gratuitously poking China in the eye. And I'm somewhat scratching my head as to how the Trump administration thinks that moves the ball forward. I hope the Trump administration is fully organized and communicating on this, but it's possible that some bureaucratic entities aren't quite communicating because it doesn't form a coherent strategy in my mind.